A senior defense official tells CBS News that there is no evidence a foreign adversary has gained access to election infrastructure. But as Jeff Pegues reports, concerns are growing about post-election unrest at home.
Today in New York City, the nation's largest police department is putting businesses on alert as stores there and around the country board up as a precaution. With 1 day to go, political tensions remain high. In Houston, vandals targeted the county's Democratic Party headquarters, spray painting the windows with the words, "Elections no, revolution yes." In Beverly Hills over the weekend, protesters and counter-protesters traded fists. The city's chief has warned about election-motivated violence. Today, he told us his officers are working 12-hour shifts with no days off.
Well, basically, we are doing is preparing for the worst and hoping for the best.
In recent weeks, the FBI has arrested militia members allegedly planning attacks. And starting tomorrow, officials will be monitoring events across the country from a command center at FBI headquarters. Washington, D.C. is likely to get extra attention. Are you anticipating violence? City Homeland Security officials are bracing for half a dozen protests over the next several days.
We certainly want to make sure that those protests are peaceful and that violence or any types of violence will not be tolerated here in the district.
We are seeing a lot of these fortresses of plywood here around D.C. as a precaution because we're being told that there are no specific threats of violence. Even still, businesses in this area aren't taking any chances after a summer of unrest. Elaine.
Jeff Pegues, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in Roderick Jones. He's a security expert and the founder of Concentric Advisors, which is a private security and cybersecurity firm. Roderick, thanks very much for being with us. Given your expertise, what are some ways law enforcement and other officials can monitor threats of violence and unrest?
Well, I think, Elaine, they'll be monitoring things like social media very closely to see what's happening. I think the nature of protesting now is that it happens very quickly and people decide to protest very quickly. And so monitoring social media, and certainly I know law enforcement will be doing that quite a lot. And also that's probably a good suggestion for citizens of the country as well, because we're all going to want to know what's going on after the election. And there is a high probability of disturbances, as your report pointed out. And so being very well informed through local news sources and social media, I think, is going to be the way forward, because the protests are going to look a little different than they have in the pre-COVID era. Different places are going to be areas of interest from protesters than they were in the past. I think it seems like bridges have become quite an interesting target for protesters over the last few months, given the close down of downtown areas. So I think keeping well informed for everybody is good advice.
So George Washington University in D.C. sent an email to students on campus telling them to stockpile a week's worth of food and other essentials in case they cannot leave their dorms or apartments. I mean, for people who aren't familiar with that campus, it is in an area of D.C. called Foggy Bottom, which is not far from the White House. But what are you hearing specifically about threats to the nation's capital, and any word about that being directed at the White House?
I think it's important to keep some context in all of these things. And I've been in the White House a number of times, and it is one of the most heavily defended parts of the world, actually, not just the country. So I think the specific danger to the White House is very limited. And the last time it was damaged was actually by the British in 1814. So I'm not sure the threat to the White House is quite there. But in terms of the protests and unrest, there's a constitutional right to assemble and to protest, and I'm sure that people want to avail themselves of that right. And the key thing is peacefulness, and that's what the Constitution allows for, and people should be allowed to peacefully protest. But unfortunately, these things become very heightened, and threatening and violent behavior comes in very quickly.
Well, some far-right militias said they plan to take to the streets regardless of who wins the election. How big of a threat do these groups pose, and how can authorities try to deter violence?
I think that American authorities have a good sense of who these groups are. I think the threat that these groups pose is summed up simply in if you turn up to a protest with a gun versus turning up with a placard, that's inherently more dangerous. I'm not sure that the Constitution actually allows for sort of violent militia activity to assemble, but I know that's a subject of debate. But I think authorities will be keeping quite a strong eye on militias simply because they carry weaponry which maybe the other side doesn't always carry. So again, I think the watchword is peaceful assembly is absolutely a fundamental part of being an American. Bringing violence or threat to protests really isn't a place for it. But I know the authorities will be keeping a very close eye on events in particular flashpoint areas.
Well, what would be your advice to Americans about staying safe this election day?
I think it's to reiterate the point of staying well informed. If you are going to a protest, be very aware of your surroundings, of course, and staying tuned to local news media because, as I said, the areas of protest might not be ones you would expect. They might not be downtown. They might be in different areas. So don't get caught out by that. And basically, my advice is to stay safe and be responsible. And the leaders amongst us in the country should be sending that message out to people that we work with and people that we partner with, and responsible politicians should also be pushing that message out that yes, please assemble and protest. That is an absolutely fundamental American right, but please do it peacefully.
All right, Roderick Jones. Roderick, thank you very much.
Thank you.